Anyway, we don't have time for your personal feelings.
Anyway, Fushiyoshi had several strange rites and customs. When combined with the ones unique to specific head families, the number grew exponentially. It revealed all the details about these things and even had info we really didn't care about right now. The content about the Uematsu was particularly harsh, even though it was noted that not everything was here. Info about the Miguruma, however, was extremely limited. However, it was said that horrible screams could be heard from their storehouse.
あの日、私はいたずら心で三の蔵の地下の扉を開けた。決して入っちゃいけないと言われた。このお印が刻まれた鉄の扉を。そして。
It seems weird that something like that wouldn't be locked or protected somehow.
Yeah, it was a morbidly interesting read, but there was only one thing that mattered to us. It was the custom of lynching in Yasumizu. It was basically describing the feast of the Yomi Purge. The Okami-sama will return from Yomi to get revenge for being killed. The story was the same. There were two notable points here. One was that it had apparently begun about 500 years ago after the village closed itself off from the world. And the other was that Kamifushiyoshi was mostly uninvolved in the feasts of that era. Kiyosuke-shi's grandfather examined the feast's origins from various angles. He investigated the stories in the Hanging Pines graveyard, looked at the records of Kamifushioshi's mason, and concluded that Kamifushiyoshi were making the groves.
Graves.
Graves, thank you. And according to the mason records, the Okiba were placed in Yasumizu at this time too. 500 years of history was enough to make it a historic landmark, but they were no megaliths from millennia BCE. They were simply put there to help turn the village into a great Lord Shinai worshipping holy ground. The words left behind by the elders of Kamifujiyoshi and Yasumizu gave us even more info. There was the legend that in a time when samurai still existed, Yomibito poured out of Yasumizu and attacked Kamifushiyoshi. That coincided with the rebellion Kiyosuke had mentioned, the reason why the head families opposed Yasumizu.
Oppressed.
Looking at both the documents and word of mouth, the rebellion had happened 5 centuries ago, shortly before the village became isolated. In Yasumizu, Yomibito were said to be scary creatures completely covered in blood water.
Oh no.
You can find the word blood water by playing with the kanji in the name Sadanaga. God. Bloodwater Rapids, the stream was considered corrupted even half a millennium ago. Anyway, though the legend was warped by superstition, there was no denying that Kamifujiyoshi was attacked by people covered in Sadanaga mud. The grandfather concluded without a doubt that this incident was what made Kamifujiyoshi people so afraid of Yasumizu. This rebellion was the very cause of the decades of isolation, the creation of the Shinai faith, and the start of the Feast of the Yomi Purge. As for what that meant, it was all planned for the purpose of holding the already discriminated Yasumizu down and preventing further rebellion. The grandfather thought that Yasumizu was purposely created to be discriminated against. It was a bad, dangerous place to live in. The reason why it wasn't abandoned wasn't mentioned here, but anyway, people continued calling it home. In governing, intentionally creating a lower class and treating them poorly satisfied the upper class and thus made their governance easier. It was something you saw all over the world. Even in Japan, there was complicated historical discrimination that left its mark even on the current era. Thus, the presence of a settlement meant to be looked down upon was good for the leaders of that era. However, they didn't want any more rebellions. So how could they stop it? One way was to make them fight amongst themselves. Another was to make them so superstitious they wouldn't even think of rebelling. Basically, they had to make them believe the lie that there were wolves among them who were killing people, causing them to kill each other. By doing that, they would sap any strength Yasumizu needed to rebel. They also prepared a background story to make them believe that the anomaly was actually real. The grandfather guessed that this was the true purpose of the 5-century-old religion. His sources for that were the documents gathered by his predecessor, which claimed that people from the local temples and shrines were called into the village. He assumed that the incomplete or intentionally destroyed records were those regarding the scholars they summoned to help create the religion. That seemed absurd at first, but after thinking about it, it was entirely reasonable. The settlement they looked down upon had bared their fangs at them, so what did they do? Call the smart people for help. That was natural. And so those scholars teamed up, created a new religion, and made the settlement fight itself. And if they'd given the head families roles in their legends to ensure proper control, man, it sounded messed up, but it didn't seem impossible.
逆だよ。あれは上藤吉の者が読み人かもしれない安水の者と目を合わさずに済ませるためにつけさせたものだ。
They wanted to avoid eye contact not only because they thought they were corrupted, but also because they were afraid. Kari Fushiyoshi was afraid of Yasumizu. It was a possibility I wouldn't have considered before, but it also seemed likely. It'd be pretty scary if the people they looked down upon finally let their grudge take over and become fearful marauders ready to enact their revenge. And because they were aware of how badly they treated the settlement, the guilt grew even larger, and they started controlling and discriminating against them even further.
There's self-fulfilling prophecy there.
Yep. When you looked at it that way, they'd made a whole religion just to protect themselves. And boy, was that insane. Now with the feast's origin revealed, what was that about the head families not being involved in it so much? Apparently the first feasts were a lot simpler than the current ones. There was the purification, sheltering, dreaming, and the limit of 1 per day, but there was no actual punishment for breaking those laws. They'd probably set it up to prevent indiscriminate massacres. Also, there was no wolf selection and there were no guardians. The heads or Fushiyoshi leaders of that time only circulated the Yasumizu legend that the wolves came back. By spreading the local legend along with a lie, they motivated the people to kill each other whenever the mists appeared. It was successful, and the people started killing suspected wolves every time the mist showed up. In response to that, those who spread the suspicions were brutalized at night. This weakened Yasumizu, left the place a breeding ground for future problems, and too weak to rebel.
待て、そんなバカな、おかしいだろう。そんなことで殺し合いが起きるはずがない。実際の脅威がないのに殺し合いが起きるというのか。
昔は今とは違います。迷信が殺し合いに発展してもおかしくない。先々代さんは初めから死刑という言葉を使ってます。僕はこれが重要だと思う。おそらく読み意味の宴は安水の住人たちにとって役立つものだったんです。
どういうことだ。
先に進みましょう。
Sure enough, the grandfather seemed to believe that, to the people of Yasumizu, the feast made the killings into a just cause. According to this, the feast wasn't considered a paranormal event, not even by the Yasumizu people themselves. It was just a justification for lynching. The hand of the law didn't reach this backwards village, and Yasumizu was even more isolated, a settlement for the ostracized. Of course, there had to be conflicts and wrongings, and the social system to solve them was limited. Thus, there was demand for solutions beyond the law, and the feast fit the bill perfectly. When the mists came, they could easily get rid of the people they didn't like. However, that came with the risk of being targeted by their friends and family. This continuous cycle of lynchings and revenge eventually destroys the minority and leaves the majority wounded. The feast ends, and the law returns to Yasumizu. It seemed like the ostracism they'd done in ancient Greece. Anyone who was against the law of the village had their names written on pottery and voted to be exiled, a backwards but effective way to keep order. Though while the punishment there was exile, the feast came with a death penalty. It was clearly unjust, but they found it better than nothing. By having these occasional unlawful disputes, they actually prevented the settlement as a whole from crumbling. Those who participated in the lynchings had their guilt lessened by considering the legends and myths. Superstition had real-world effects. By telling people that they'd be hanged if they were bad, the renegades among them would be silenced. So yeah, the Feast of the Yomi Purge had its perks for both Kami Fushioshi and Yasumizu. Also, apparently, it was a long-running tradition for Kami Fushioshi to do certain things immediately before the mists came. They summoned the children of Yasumizu to Kami Fushioshi and called the women to help them with food. There was no end to these records. It was much like the mountain festival, the carrot for the stick they constantly provided the settlement. But it was also a form of population control. They didn't want Yasumizu to be completely depopulated, so they protected the children. This tradition was alive to this day. Even 8 years ago, Tai-san, Kaori-san, and the children have been saved from the feast when they were called. So while it had its roots in superstition, the Feast of the Yomi Purge became a kind of social tool.
なるほど。統制されたリンチ。いいな。これはもう合議による死刑制度と言っていいだろう。我々上藤吉の人間に都合のいい形で安水の中で完結する死刑制度。これでは室たちが言うように完全に長者は悪者ではないか。
それはどうでしょう。当時の統治者たちは当時なりの良識感覚で良い統治を目指しただけかもしれない。問題は現代に至るまでその統治が続いてしまっていることですが。
そうだ。今の安水ならこんなことが起きるはずがないのだ。
そう書いてありますか？
戦中戦後に宴は3度あったとされているな。
The feast meant to manage society had ended with the one that began at the start of World War II. When Kyonosuke-shi's grandfather wrote this, he called it the previous feast. The ones who survived it said that an actual wolf had appeared. Also, rules like sheltering, which had been ignored until then, now came with a supernatural punishment. The legend had gone from mere story to reality. I wonder if this is sort of, they believe so stringently in it and that it ended up manifesting.
Yeah, they willed their gods into existence through belief.
Yeah. Didn't Mamiya say something to that extent earlier on?
That sounds right. That sounds like something that pissed off Tai.
I think she said something, yeah. The grandfather himself had witnessed some paranormal things too. There was a pile of dog corpses that seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. The thorough, violent deaths given to the rule breakers, the wolves who could come in through locked doors and brutalize the ones inside. And finally, the unity between the wolves, hell-bent on killing the humans, even if it meant their own death. That was the feast I knew. The next text was written by the previous head, Kyonosuke-shi's father, and he'd observed the third feast of the recent times. It was the one that had happened 8 years ago, and its survivors mentioned impossible paranormal events that actually happened. It was the same, the exact same. The feast had been supernatural 3 times in a row. And this was the 4th one. That meant that something had drastically changed with the feast that happened during the war. The reason for that wasn't given here.
大丈夫ですか？ショックだとは思います。少し休みますか？
いや、いい。一気に読んでしまおう。次は我が父が主にまとめた記述だな。
This is one hell of a lore dump.
Yep. Scrapbook!
Scrapbook! Like Kinosuke said, the final section of the diary is written by the previous head of the Masato family. He'd inherited the will of his predecessors and tried solving this mystery. Though, unlike them, he seemed to prioritize documents that had been released to the public. For one, there were cutouts of articles. He'd taken various clippings from newspapers and magazines to create an extremely large scrapbook. They were bits from local newspapers, national ones, and both general and specialized magazines of varied renown. Basically, he'd gathered all the info regarding Fujiyoshi, no matter how minor. Of course, we didn't have the time to look through all of them, so we relied on the index and the diary. We found out that the small village had a number of unexpectedly major events happen in it. They were so big that they actually made it to national newspapers. Some of the oldest and more notable ones were the articles about the serial murders here that had happened here over 60 years ago. There were a number of articles with titles like 20 Deadly Break-ins in Fujiyoshi and Murders in 20 Houses in Mountain Village, and I found that number to be significant. Though the number of places that had been attacked was 20, the number of casualties was 17. 8 more were injured. Regardless, it was definitely big enough to make a mark on Japanese history. Hold on. 17 casualties. How many people are participating in the feast? Isn't it somewhere along like 17 or 18?
Somewhere like that.
Okay. This event was well covered for something that had happened on the eve of World War II, and it ended with the culprit being sent to Tokyo and quickly executed. The incident was reported for 2 years, from when it came to light right up to the capital punishment. It could be summed up like this. On December 27, 1940, in Fujiyoshi village, Kamifujiyoshi, Hochizuki, a man covered in mud invaded a private dwelling. He quickly used the kitchen knife he had to attack 2 of the people inside, destroy property, then escape. One of the victims went on to die. The culprit went on to continue invading houses in Hochizuki, murder, and destroy property. After 30 minutes of this, he escaped Fujimura by foot. The crime was so sudden that the inhabitants and the local police couldn't do anything about it before it was over. The incident came to light when the local police reported it to the Metropolitan Police. Since cars weren't widespread in the area yet, the doctors from the surrounding villages hurried over with their horse-drawn carriages. That was how much of a big deal it was. The police had gathered a number of officers and established a perimeter to surround the culprit, but in the end, they failed to arrest him. The witnesses, bloodstains, and the lost items made them conclude that the culprit had changed his clothes somewhere up the mountain, then escaped by going down the river. They followed after him, but since it was the end of the year and it was hard to get around, it took them time to find proper footprints. On January 3rd of the following year, the prefecture police noted that the perimeter was broken, but this wasn't reported. The investigations that followed bore no fruit, and the newspapers and magazines wrote a lot about the escaped or hidden murderer. But then, at one afternoon at the end of January, a man showed up at a police station in Mangetsubashi, Tokyo, and said that he was the murderer who'd escaped Fujiyoshi. There'd been much speculation about where the culprit was from, but it turned out that he was actually a local, which raised a few questions. One of them was, why couldn't the locals figure out who it was? This question was left unanswered, and the man who turned himself in, Kihei Tochitani, 30 years old, became a subject of significant controversy. From this point on, the major newspapers simply reported how the trial was going, while the magazines just had a ton of opinion pieces. Kiyonosuke's father commented that the Miguruma were actively keeping journalists from entering Yasumizu. At the same time, they didn't resist the police and in fact were highly cooperative. But in the end, Yasumizu wasn't really mentioned in the trial reports. It could have been the weak legislative system of the time or the result of the Miguruma's efforts. Under such circumstances, they held Kihei Tochitani's trial. He insisted on several things. That he was too drunk to remember the details. However, he was certain that he was the murderer. He lived in that area and was on bad terms with his neighbors to the point of holding a serious grudge. When he sobered up, he became scared and ran away, and since he knew he couldn't keep running forever, he just turned himself in. He was too afraid to return to Fujiyoshi. Some had found his statement that he'd attacked 20 households in 30 minutes questionable, but it was a trial under significant public scrutiny. And since Kihei Tochitani admitted to the crime, he was executed based solely on that. It happened 2 years after his arrest. Okay. I have a thought.
Okay.
Kihei Tochitani took the fall for the real killer. I don't think this guy was the actual killer.
Mm-hmm.
I think the real killer is the old man who cried wolf.
Yo.
Yo! Yo! It makes sense. No, it makes sense.
It does.
He's the right age. He's every time he's been told, selected that to be hanged or something like that, he says, I need time. Like he's going to try and escape. He killed Mochi in
the one time
loop.
Kanza wasn't around, he killed Mochi.
Yeah. It's him. He's the guy. Oh my god. All right. The capital punishment was carried out and he departed this world without further comment of note. The news agencies were now all covered World War II, so these serial murders ended up being forgotten. Also, Kionosuke-shi's father noted something about him. 3 years before the incident, Kihei Tochitani had been sent to Yasumizu because of trouble with his neighbors.
気になりますね。
そうだな。おそらくこれは土地谷喜兵衛が読み人伝説を模倣し起こした事件だ。
安水での暮らしがそう長いわけでもないのに、そんな事件を。
藤吉村民に共通の読み人を恐れる気持ちが裏返しとなり、恐ろしき読み人と同一化を試みたのかもしれんな。あるいは長者が地質する大昔の反乱のことをどこかで聞いていたか。
そして僕が気にしているのはこの時期のことです。この事件が起きてからおよそ2年後に例の戦中の本物の宴が発生している。
まるで同じではないか。
そうです。500年前反乱を起こした連中を抑え込むために信内侵攻なんてものをでっち上げたあのことと。
Of course, there were no mentions of the feast in the articles. The next notable thing was the time when the war ended and the soldiers returned to Fujiyoshi. These news articles were accompanied by village PR notices and photos. One of the men in the photos had the name Shosaburo Makishima. That face and expression, I had no doubt that he was related to Kanzo Makishima. Many from Fujiyoshi had departed for the war, and naturally some of them were from Yasumizu. Also, according to the reports, they had a notably good survival rate. They'd also achieved a lot on the front lines, and the PR said it was the blessing of the Okami-sama. In a different document, it was said that they had charms that resembled the Okami symbols used in the mountain festival. There was a photo that showed one of these crests wrinkled from wear. The shape was new to me. However, the three diamond-like symbols made me think that it was related to the one I was familiar with.
Yeah, you could definitely put the little spirals in there.
Yeah, which was actually pictured here. The text next to it said that some chose to wear ominous symbols instead. For reference, there was the divine crest of Great Lord Shinai. It was actually my first time seeing it, and apparently they couldn't use it as a good luck charm because it was just too important. Well then, if it was that sacred, it made sense that I hadn't seen it in Yasumizu. It was a bad place after all. Next, we skipped the unimportant bits, such as the election results and mayor staff changes. We went ahead a few decades and arrived at an article from the 80s. This was pretty bad. Cholera outbreak in Mountain Village, 4 dead. It was a pretty simple incident. Apparently, someone who'd gone on a trip overseas had infected the village. The name of patient 0 was hidden, but it had to be one of the village heads. They were the only ones here who could travel to other countries.
Mm-hmm.
It was damn awful to read about, but apparently the disease spread through water contaminated by the first victim's vomit and excreta, and there were victims in both Fujiyoshi as well as Yasumizu. Also, it was only reported after the disease had subsided, which was probably caused by the Miguruma intelligence network.
これ、時期的には野里さんもご存知のはずの事件ですよね。中学生かそこらですか？
その通り。 もちろん知っているとも。
Oh.
何しろ私もかかったからね。
え、コレラにですか？
ああ、そうだ。というか、あれには相当の人数がやられたからな。特に安水の連中が。
なんですって？今おられる方も？
確かそうだな。牧島王やら山脇さんやら、あとはそうだ、室もかかっていたはずだぞ。
Hmm.
Huh.
大事だったんですね。
And only
その
four
通
died?
りだ。後で知ったところによれば、野里は早々にコレラだということを看破していたのに、身車の連中が。
Ooh, we're gonna get some dirt.
一体何が？
コレラにこそ神内様の加護が効くとか言って、わけのわからん祈祷を行って野里の措置を妨害したのだよ。おかげ
We
で
found the
状況は悪化し、
anti-vaxxers.
遅れて発症した私は身内が後回しだと言ってかなり捨て置かれたのだ。
医者の鏡みたいな家ですね、野里家は。
鏡なものか。単に身車が示す順に治療していただけだ。もちろん安水は長く捨て置かれ、結果的に住人2名と看病に当たった植松の者2名が死んだ。
Huh.
なんですって？植松が2名？
あの頃植松にはまだ数人が残っていたが、そのほとんどが民間療法を行って逆に病気
They
に感
tried
染
to
してしま
fuck
って
the
いた。
collar out of them.
Apparently it
それ
didn't
が露見
work.
した時は
No, it didn't.
すでに手の施しようがないほど悪化した2名がそのまま亡くなったのだよ。あれが植松の没落を決定づけたと言っても過言ではなかろう。身分が
That's what happened
適
to
切な
them.
指示をしていれば。 いや、違うな。野里がクス氏の家が連中のことなど聞かず正しく動いていればよかったのだ。
ちなみに植松里香子さんは病気にはかからなかったんですか？
彼女は当時9歳だぞ。その家業に加わるにはまだ若い。
ああ、なるほど。
I knew what he meant, but something didn't feel right. His eyes betrayed a sense of confusion, and his tone lacked confidence.
何か隠されていますか？
何もない。
Yes, you are.
いや、何でもない。とにかくこれも我が藤吉村の期待を示す証左ではあろうが、宴とは直接は関係あるまい。
そうですね。
I wouldn't push any further this time. Another major article was one about a corpse that had washed up in a local part of Saranaga, officially known as Saranagawa, apparently. It was a woman from Chiba, and she'd had a search party out for her. It said that she'd simply committed suicide.
これは読み意味の宴と関係あります？
いや、これまでの宴とは日付が合わない。おそらく関係のない自殺者だろう。
バカな町の奴らが山ん中で首つって獣に食われることもある。俺やおやっさんが苦労して片付ける羽目になる。皿長に死体が流れることも珍しくねえ。渓流釣りだかなんだか知らねえが、上流は危ねえっつうのによ。
首都圏からの遠征自殺者ですか？
まあ、うがってみるなら長者の誰かが関わって殺したのかもしれんが、その場合は皿長には流さんだろうよ。
ではこれはいいとして、この8年前の大雨災害がどうのっていうのは藤吉とは関係ないように見えますが。
逆に藤吉が乗っていないことが重要なのだろうよ。各地の土砂崩れは報道されているのに藤吉のはないと。
Huh.
ああ。
I see. So even the ones who supposedly died in the landslide were hidden from the
あ
public.
とはめぼしいものはないか。
これは港区連続火災、放火の疑い。なんで。
手記に説明があるぞ。報道にはないが、放火された7軒の建物は全て同じ持ち主のものだと。
Ah,
というと
he's the rich.
Yeah.
身車家だよ。連中は中だけではなく、外にも不動産を持っているのだ。
なるほど。そういった資産から収入を得てるのか。しかし一体どうしてそんな。
宗教は儲かるということなんじゃないのかね。500年もの歴史があれば、もう新興宗教とは言えんだろう。
I mean, yeah, that
お
makes
そら
sense.
くは我々のような骨の髄まで神内明神にやられている連中でない、神内教の在外信者は多数いるのだよ。中には何代も前から玉串料とか言って金銭を払っている者もいるのではないかね。
もしかして身車は宗教法人格を持ってますか？
さあ、そこまでは知らんね。しかしそういうのは国からいろいろ口出しをされるのではないのかね。
どうだろう。そっちは詳しくないな。
さて、このくらいでおしまいのようだが。
Yeah, we'd read the entire diary. A whole 3 hours had passed since we'd started. The mist would come soon. I'd learned a lot from this, but if you ask me, all I'd gotten here were maybes. Nothing was certain yet. Even so, I thought it was more than enough for this loop.
ど
Time
う
to
しよ
die.
うかね。我が父も結局、何かしらの真実にたどり着くことはできぬまま。私が君の言う通り、これから宴に巻き込まれて死ぬとすれば、我が兄がいずれこの後を継ぐのだろうかね。いや、君が死んでしまえば全てなかったことになるんだったか。これは結局どうにもならん。
His wry grin pained my heart a bit. I had to say it.
申し訳ありません。野里清之助さん。
君が謝ることではなかろう。こんなバカなことをしている藤吉村が全ての元凶だ。しかし結局、ここまで皆が狂気にとらわれる答えは何なのだ。迷信を信じる心と反乱を恐れる心。
いいえ、違います。神様のせいです。
はあ？なんだ、君も結局は神仏に責任を転嫁するのかね。かつての野里の先達のように。そうだ、君はそもそも君が体験してきた数々の怪奇
Yeah, I
現
was
象
wondering when
を
that
通
was.
して
I was
科
wondering
学
when
的
that was
に
going to
説
come
明
up.
がつくと言っていただろうに。
すみません。神様の件についても、おおむね科学的な、というか、理屈をつけることはできると思います。
何？
ただ、これについては、まだ僕の中で完全にはまとまっていない。その代わり、他のものについては、ええ、説明はつきますね。
I'd missed my chance to properly apologize. How much time do we have, I wondered. Would they wait for that? Would they wait for long?
では、読み意味の宴の不可思議をすべて紐解いてみたまえよ。必ず与えられるという汚れは一体どう説明するつもりなんだね。隠そうがどうしようが見つかり、断罪されるその理不尽さはどうやって成し得ると思っているのかね。
監視カメラと盗聴器です。
He stared blankly for a moment, then laughed.
何を言い出すのかと思えば、監視カメラ？そんなもの戦時中にあったわけがないだろう。
戦時中にあったとは言いませんよ。というか、8年前にあったかどうかもわからないです。
Okay.
ただ、低レベルなものはあったかもしれない。ぶっちゃけどこかに糸電話でも吊るしてあったのかもしれません。あるいはシンプルにスパイを休みずに置いておくとかね。
物騒だな。
言いたいのは、安水集落は隅々にわたり監視されているということです。
バカな、長者はそんなに暇ではない。
でも一方で、神内様の信仰を盤石にするために信じられないほどの労力を費やしてきたのも長者でしょう。
That's a good point.
Yeah, and
What the fuck else do they have to do?
Exactly, and he just pointed out that the Shinai faith is probably spread beyond the village. It brings in money.
わかりますよ、あなたの気持ちは。僕もそのバカなと疑う気持ちがトリックを隠蔽する最大の仕掛けです。マジシャンが芸を披露するとき、その種は往々にしてそんなバカな手に引っかかるはずないというようなものか、あるいはそんな大仕掛けをまさか用意しているわけがないという真理の穴に隠されているものですよ。観客全部が桜だとかね。ちなみに僕はこれも最初は疑いましたよ。安水全員が決死のドッキリ要員だとか。
待ちたまえ。それでは不可解に傷つけられた死体については。
死体を運搬して重機か何かで破壊すれば実現はできますよね。
おかしいだろう。霧の安水からは出られないと君が言ったことだ。
地下の抜け穴でもあるんじゃないですか。
待て。じゃあ本気で犬をけしかけて殺した死体をわざわざ抜け穴を通って上藤吉まで持ち帰って、それを手間暇かけて損壊して安水まで持ち帰っていると、そんなバカげ
Yeah, that's real
バ
bizarre.
カげたことを。
馬鹿げているからみんな信じる。
じゃあ狼が触れると家の鍵が勝手に開いたというのは
遠隔操作の電子錠でしょうね。
あの貧相な、失礼。しかし実際
Oh my
さま
god.
つな安水の住居もかね。
ボロい木板でも電子錠は仕込めます。そうすれば実際見事なカムフラージュになるでしょうね。
じゃあ血で記されるという過去の印は一体何だというのだね。過去による託戦が血文字で伝えられるなどというのもありえないだろう。人間がやったら気づくはずだ。
麻酔ガスなら一発です。あなたならご存知のはずだ。亜酸化窒素とオクトゲンチラインの混合ガスは理想的な全身麻酔を実現する。
Okay, yeah, but that shit smells.
Yeah.
周期もほとんどない。これはある意味危険なので普通はあえて匂いをつけるそうですが、今回はそれもプラスに働く。
What the fuck, Haruaki? Why do you know this?
バカを言うな。確かに君は少しばかり医療知識があるようだが、麻酔は専門医がいるほど難しい
Yeah,
技
it's
術
really fucking dangerous.
いるんでしょう、野里家以外の専門医が。
いたとしても、その上で各住居にさらなる改造を無断で施し、必要な密閉空間を作ったとしても。
But wait, that okay. This, yeah, what Hillary's saying. Chiemi noticed he was lying when he introduced himself, and part of it was him being a grad student. Anyway, he might actually have some background, but no, this okay. The whole shelter thing, though, it might be the reason for that might be so that if when they're inside, they're all knocked out. You know what I'm saying? The gas is pumped into the houses.
Yeah.
That's the big. That's why the whole law is shelter, cleanse, and dream. If they're
Right.
caught outside, these people just straight up fucking kill them.
That's still a lot of fucking anesthetic gas, though.
Oh yeah, no, you're absolutely right. But fuck, I don't know.
生命維持設備もない場所で本人の同意なく混沌させるような乱暴な施術で確実な蘇生が実現できるとは。
そうです。確実に蘇生しなくてもいい。
運悪く死亡させても構わない。死体を損壊して家の外に放り出しておけば物意味違反者と見分けはつかない。バカなバカな、そんなバカみたいな。
わかりますよ。僕だってこんなオチを明かされたら納得できない。でもそれが可能である以上、これは神業でも何でもない。トリックで実現できる不思議な事象は全てトリックによって発生してるんですよ、野里さん。
This is a callback to what he said near the beginning of the game.
He said a lot of things near the beginning of the game.
I just remember him saying things that, like, most things can be explained through mundane means.
Okay, yeah.
そして君がさっき謝罪をした意味も、この部屋が放置されているということは、身車の連中はここに気づかなかったか入れなかったということだ。
Now I just remember, he said it when he was in the outhouse, when he was stuck there, when he was thinking about everything that was happening.
Mm-hmm.
He was talking about, like, oh, this has to be a trick or something like that. You know, even the most ridiculous things have the most mundane explanations.
Okay, yeah.
しかしこうして大っぴらに探索をし、大声で議論をしたからには、先方は気づくはずだ。君の言う通り、カメラやら盗聴器やらが仕込んであるなら、そしてそのことに気づいたとすれば、彼らにとって我々は生かしておくことはできない。宴の開始を待たず殺す必要が、これは。
そうですね。
My consciousness began to fade. The irresistible drowsiness took over my body.
君の勝ちだな。
ほらね。
だがもっとうまい方法はなかったのか。
すみません。
Maybe this is why Rikako it talks so slow. She's just completely doped up on anesthetic all the time.
Oh, maybe.
Unable to stand, I fell to my knees. I hit my forehead on the desk, but the pain was minimal. It didn't kill me, huh?
どうせあるだろう、親父。これだ。
He could still move. Crawling on his hands and knees, he opened a drawer and took out a small glass bottle.
君が死ねば全ては戻るのだよな。ならばこれをトリカブト捕まって拷問でも
Oh, he's trying to save me.
厄介だろう。
I appreciated that. I reached out, took it, and put it in my mouth.
私も飲もう。
Oh, drank it all, sorry.
たとえなかったことになるのだとしても、先祖の積み重ねてきたものを。
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we'll be able to put it to good use. Don't worry, Kiyanosuke.
Just one last sentence.
無駄にはしない。
Man, if I were dying here, I would go out just flipping the double bird so that when they came and got my body, they knew exactly. You know, like, go fuck you guys.
Right.
I just had to say that much. I now had a duty to fulfill for this awkward man. With every loop, I gained not only memories, but one-sided responsibilities as well. That meant that I really had to save everyone, right?
Yeah, you do, buddy.
Yeah, you do. Death came quick. That really didn't seem all that quick. Also, I just got a trophy called Nut Talk 1.
Nut talk?
Yep, Nut Talk. N-U-T.
What the fuck?
I don't know. Nut Talk 1.
As in, there are multiple nut talks?
There might be multiple Nut Talks.
Oh my god.
I hope the other Nut Talk is with Takumi.
Yeah, me too.
I want to watch Head Corner. Tell me
Yeah,
about the
tell us
other
where to
Nut
take
Talks.
this key.
Oh, there's key 8.
Oh, that was the one we were missing for that big one, huh?
Yep.
今回は回答編の中でも相当に長かったな。しかもどえらい中身だった。
Yeah, that was a lengthy loop.
Yep. Almost 2 hours.
Yeah. Flirting in the dark with Kiyanosuke assassination.
Scandalous.
手に入った情報は大きく2つ。長者側が調べ上げた藤吉村の長い歴史。そして、身車の目と呼ばれる監視網だ。監視網については、夫妻子春明は結構前から薄々気づいてた節があるな。
I'm so pleased that the writers are still just ripping the piss out of Haruaki.
Yep.
歴史については、宴や信内明神の本質に大きく踏み込むものだったな。これらがどう結実するのか。最後の加速への期待を高めてくれ。
I'm real hyped.
ちなみに、ここまで順路沿いに来た大将は、最後の鍵のうち4つはもう手に入っているはずだ。このうち3つを使えば、2、
Yes.
Yes.
9、便所泊するかの鍵を開けられる。そこで便所かよとはまあ言わねえでくれ。すげえ大事な分岐点だからよ。キーが揃ってねえ大将はエンド3を見て流れの確認をするのもいいと思うぜ。よし、今回はここまで。次も元気に死んでこい。
死んでこい。Fucking love this. All right. Chart. Come on. There we go. Okay. So he said 2 dense mist. Not that one.
Yeah, keep going.
Here we
There
go.
we go.
Hide in the outhouse.
Yes.
Yes. Look for him.
Him?
At that moment, my head was flooded with information. As if I had been crushed by 1,000 sheep. Or a million sheep.
A million sheep. Yes!
Yep, it felt like my mind was crushed by 1,000,000 sheep. Crap, again? With this timing at such a chaotic moment? I had lots of things to think about, but that'd be a waste of this loop. Well, I would start by calming down.
ちえみちゃん。
何？
まだ思い出せないか。はじめまして、ちえみちゃん。
あ、そっか。そうだった。遅ればせながら、はじめまして、春明さん。
絶対に、物音一つ立てないで。
やめろ！本気だったんだから。
Since we started sharing memories every loop, one of us, mostly Chiemi, always forgot something, leaving it to the other to remember.
今回なんか試すの？夜は、私なんだかんだ苦手なんだけど。
無理しないでいいよ。僕はちょっと思いついたことがあるから。
戻ってこれる？
多分無理、かな。君はどうする？
さっさと自殺しよっかな。
なんかそういうの、全部解決した後に癖になってそうで嫌だな。
そうだね。良くない傾向だ。とりあえず、試せること試すよ。
悪いね。何試す？
ヤス君にモーションかけてみるとか。
Well.
ああ、なるほど。ご自由に。
怒った？
いや、怒るのはおかし
だよね。
It would
い。
be.
もちろん。
Yeah.
嘘だよ。そんなのしない。
そう。
じゃあ、また。
Had I been attacked just now? It was no big deal. I could easily control my feelings toward other people. Man, why was I so mad?
Haha.
I needed to get a hold of myself. I was now by myself. What was there for me to do? I just remembered. I'd try to solve that problem, though it probably wouldn't be a solution. But if I didn't try, I felt like there'd be a trap waiting for me when I least expected it. And so I went to the north of Yasumizu. This thicket near the graveyard was where that person supposedly lived. The old man! The old man!
Old man, yes!
Naturally, it was empty. Then again, not much time had passed since the mist came. I hid in a bush not far away and watched the dwelling as the mist covered it. Just as I expected the corruption to come after me. Yes! Yes! Ah, yes! He showed up. The old
There
man
he
who
is.
cried wolf. He'd done some strange things over the loops, but always ended up dying. I'd assumed that his senility was just an act, but I still didn't know the truth. Though, I'd gained more reasons to suspect him recently.
Yeah, remember how they mentioned a couple of times that his dwelling didn't look like it counted as shelter?
Yep, I'd love to expose him for who he was. I continued holding my breath and watching him. Apparently, in the hut, he was carrying around a lot of dirty cloth rags. I saw it from behind the shabby wall here. The state of the place was one of the reasons I suspected him. Could this place, which had more holes in it than the outhouse, really be used for sheltering? Over the many loops, I realized that there were two primary dangers here in Yasumizu. One was the bringers of corruption, as God said, the rabid dogs. And then there were the werewolf-like creatures that were probably Great Lord Shinai's servants. You could beat the former, but not the latter. Normally the dogs upheld the order of the night. But if the rule breakers dealt with the dogs, that thing appeared, killed the rule breakers, and set things straight. I hadn't escaped that thing once so far. The dogs would definitely kill you if you slept in a place so damaged, and that was another thing I found suspicious about him. As it turned out, he really didn't have any intention of staying in his house. Yasumizu was deathly quiet, so it wasn't a good situation to try and tail him in. I had a feeling any rustling I made by moving around would tip him off. Still, I couldn't just watch him leave. Ugh, whatever, I just trust that he couldn't hear that far. Even so, I got on all fours and followed him, careful not to step on any leaves or loose twigs. I climbed over a collapsed okiba too, and I could only hope that wouldn't mean I was cursed or something. Well, if I was, I felt like God would have punished me by now. Weren't we outside of Yasumizu by now? The Yasumizu area was like a scar cut out from the land, surrounded by cliffs. Was it okay as long as we didn't cross a cliff? In that case, I really should have looked into this overgrown area a bit more. There's still many things I could try. It wasn't the time to despair. But damn, the old wolf guy seemed to know exactly where he was going. Was his hideout nearby? That sound, was that water? Was there a river here? I looked around to find the source of the sound. It felt like it was straight ahead. There was a river in Yasumizu? Wait, where did you go?